I have a PhD in theology from King's College, University of London in England. And when I studied theology, I began to study not because I wanted a career in theology, but more because I was interested in pursuing particular questions that helped me understand who God was and how God is involved in the world, basically. So somehow or another that eventually led to the point of my making a decision to get ordained and to serve in the church. And for me, that's always been a process of continuing to work out my faith in the context of thinking theologically as well as the life of the church, and wanting to work alongside of other people in the church to encourage the life of the church. I teach a mix of courses. I teach preaching. I teach practical theology or pastoral theology. People use both terms. I'm not really all that happy with either one because they don't really encompass what practical or pastoral theology is about. And then I teach theology proper as well in a course called The Image of God, which is where we explore what it means to be made in the image of God. One of the areas that I've been working on recently, which is part of my studies but also part of my research, is the relationship between mission and formation. So the whole question of how are communities formed, how are people formed, and by that I mean probably spiritual formation, how are we built up as a community in our understanding of the faith, and how also as a Christian community we are also called in to be part of God's mission in the world. That's probably an area that I both end up teaching quite a bit in several of the courses that I teach. It's a theme that comes up, certainly something that is really important in the life of the church at this point in time, but also an area that I'm really interested in exploring the relationship between the two. What does it mean to be a community that is both being built up but also being sent out into the world? One of the problems with practical or pastoral theology in the 20th century was that it really became about techniques, the how-tos of ministry. And as such, a lot of pastoral theology was disconnected from theology proper. So it became almost a separate discipline. Didn't really need to be theological. So it was more pastoral studies than it was pastoral theology. And I think what I've been really interested in is that there's been a significant movement within theological circles to recover the theological dimension. So once again, understanding that how we do ministry, how we lead in the church, how we help people grow up in their faith, all of those questions have to find their origin not just in what we do, but actually in who God is and how God is engaged with us. It seems in some senses really obvious. Pastoral theology should be about theology proper. But the fact is, I think in an awful lot of our churches, people function as though it's about what we do rather than our being involved in what God is doing. One of the ways to think about that would be in terms of thinking about mission and the way we think about mission. For a long time, when we used the word mission, what we meant was, what is the task that God has given the church to do in the world? And I think people have, in the 20th century and then into the 21st century, have re-explored that question, recognizing that that's a really problematic way to think about mission. Mission actually belongs to God. It's God's mission in the world. He doesn't give the task to the church. He actually uses the church, or he involves the church in what he's doing. So our task isn't to make mission happen. Our task is to be responsible and reflective of and working alongside of what God is doing, to be attentive to God. So at the heart of that, I think, is a renewed understanding that pastoral theology, or the understanding of the church and how the church works in the world, begins with the question of who is God? Father, Son, and Spirit. What is God doing in the world? What is God's purposes for us? Where is our place in relationship to God? And how does that all fit together in the ways that we think about the church? One of the other areas that I do teach a little bit on, I teach a little bit about the relationship between the church and culture, or questions of that. And again, it's another one of those issues that for a long time we believed that the church was distinct from culture. So culture was actually the way we spoke about society, and the church functioned independently of culture, and the church's job was actually to work to change culture. Well, we have a far more sophisticated understanding of culture at this point in time, and understand that the church is just as much a part of the world around us as it is a distinct entity, and that somehow we have to work out those significant questions of how the church is actually in the world, and yet it's being shaped in response to God. Those are significant questions, but the way we frame that and frame the understanding of the church's relationship to the world is a fascinating issue. Absolutely vital for anybody thinking about ministry or thinking about going into ministry, or even just wanting to understand the Christian faith. They need to grapple with those significant questions. And I think Wycliffe really gives the opportunity for people to do that.